Story number 1.
It was late October when we decided to take that road trip. There were four of us: me, Derek, Julia, and Tanya. We were all fresh out of college in that strange limbo between school and real life, and this trip was supposed to be our last carefree adventure before settling into jobs, bills, and whatever adulthood meant. Derek had borrowed his brother's old SUV, and the plan was to drive from Portland to Glacier National Park in Montana over 5 days, stopping at small towns, hiking trails, and odd roadside attractions. The first 2 days were smooth: laughter, music, bad food, and scenic views. Julia had brought a film camera she insisted on using for aesthetic shots, and Tanya had a playlist that spanned 3 decades. Everything was normal. Good, even. That started to change on the third day, right around the Idaho-Montana border. We'd taken a detour off the highway to avoid traffic from an accident we heard about on the radio. That's when we ended up on Route 41, a narrow 2-lane road that wound through hills and dense forest. No streetlights, barely any signage, and the occasional old wooden barn falling apart on someone's land. The GPS kept recalculating. Cell service dropped out completely. We weren't lost exactly, but the road felt wrong. It was already past 7 p.m. and the sun had dipped below the trees, leaving that eerie twilight where everything looks like it's waiting to turn into something else. That's when we saw the motel. It looked abandoned at first, one of those 1950s motor lodges with a flickering neon sign that read, "Rest Easy Inn." The parking lot was cracked, weeds growing up through the asphalt, and only one car sat under a carport. Still, we were tired, and it had started to drizzle. After some debate, we agreed to check it out. Derek volunteered to go inside first and came back with a shrug. "There's someone at the front desk. Old guy, weird voice, but he says they've got rooms, $40 each, cash only." I asked if he'd looked at the rooms, and he nodded. "They're fine. Not great, but it's either this or sleeping in the SUV." We followed him inside. The lobby smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. A small TV on a shelf played static. Behind the counter stood an old man in a brown cardigan. His skin was pale and papery, like old onions, and his eyes were strangely glassy. He didn't say much, just slid over 4 rusty-looking keys labeled 1 through 4. Our rooms were all in a row, facing the lot. We chose to double up, me with Derek, Julia with Tanya. The rooms were nearly identical: faded carpet, mismatched lamps, a TV that didn't work, and a small bathroom with flickering fluorescent lights. The beds had floral spreads that looked washed out, and the whole place smelled faintly of something chemical, like bleach, trying to cover up something worse. None of us felt comfortable. Tanya joked that it looked like the set of a horror movie. Julia tried to take a picture of the room with her film camera, but when she clicked the shutter, she winced. "What's wrong?" I asked. She looked at the camera. "I don't know. It jammed, I think. It's not advancing." She fiddled with it for a while, but gave up. We decided to meet back outside in 20 minutes and head into the nearest town for food. That's when Derek came out of the bathroom, pale. "There's something weird in the tub," he said. I went in to look. The tub had brown stains near the drain, old rust maybe, but more disturbing was the thick ring around the inside. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. On the wall, faintly, as if written with a wet finger or maybe even something else, was the word "stay." I laughed it off. "Probably someone playing a prank or mold patterns. It's an old place." He didn't seem convinced. I didn't notice it when I first walked in. We headed out shortly after. The nearest diner was about 20 minutes down the road. Inside, the waitress gave us a strange look when we mentioned where we were staying. "The Rest Easy?" she said slowly, her lips tightening. "Didn't think anyone still ran that place." I asked if she knew anything about it. Used to be popular back in the day. Then there was a fire, early 90s, I think. Someone died in room 3. They shut it down for a while, reopened with new owners, but it's never been the same. People don't stay long, don't like the feel of it. We all exchanged glances. Julia asked what kind of fire. The woman hesitated. "Electrical, I think. But some folks say it was murder. One of the guests, they never really solved it, just left it behind." We ate in near silence after that. When we got back, the fog had rolled in. Thick, almost unnatural. It dulled the sound of our footsteps and made the neon sign look like it was underwater. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. We joked nervously, trying to break the tension, but even Tanya had gone quiet. In the room, I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing creaks from the ceiling like footsteps in the attic, even though the motel was one story. Around 1 a.m., Derek shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" I strained. At first, I thought it was just wind or an old building settling. Then I heard it. A dragging sound, soft, slow, like something being pulled across carpet. It seemed to come from the hallway outside. Derek moved toward the window and peeled back the curtain. "There's someone out there," he whispered. I joined him. Through the fog and the dim yellow light of the porch lamps, we could barely make out a figure moving from one end of the motel to the other. Their posture was all wrong, slumped, one arm hanging low and limp. As they passed room 3, they stopped and turned toward the door. Then the lights in the hallway flickered and went out. Derek backed away. "Lock the door." I already had, but I checked it again. Deadbolt, latch, everything. We stayed up the rest of the night, too wired to sleep. At dawn, we knocked on the girl's door. Tanya looked half asleep, but Julia's face was pale. "You saw him too?" She asked before we said anything. We nodded. "I had a dream," she said. Or I thought it was a dream. Someone came into the room. He stood over Tanya's bed. Just stood there. I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Tanya frowned. "I didn't see anything, but I had this feeling all night, like someone was watching me, like if I moved too much, they'd notice." We didn't waste any more time. We packed, left the keys on the desk, and got the hell out of there. It was barely 7 a.m. The old man at the counter wasn't there. The lobby was dark. The TV still played static. About an hour later, we stopped for gas in a larger town. Derek went in to pay, and I stayed behind with Julia while Tanya used the bathroom. That's when Julia pulled out her camera and opened the back. "There's something wrong," she said. She showed me the film. It had advanced despite jamming earlier, but every photo was ruined, blurred, dark streaks like scratches. Except for one. It was a picture of the motel hallway looking down toward room 3. And standing just outside the room, partly turned toward the camera, was the figure we'd seen the night before. His face wasn't right. It looked, melted, burned. One eye sagged lower than the other, and the skin was charred and blackened. His mouth was open wide like he was screaming, but there was no sound, no motion, just a frozen image. We stared at it for a long time. Neither of us said anything. Derek got back in the car. "Let's just get to the park. I don't want to think about that place anymore." We didn't talk about the motel again until after the trip, when we got home. Julia took the photo to a camera shop, asking if it might be a light leak or chemical issue. The technician looked at it and just said, "No, this isn't from the camera." She asked what he meant. "I mean, this was in front of the lens. This is part of the image. I don't know how else to explain it." Julia didn't keep the photo. She burned it. I've had nightmares since then. Not constant, but recurring. Always that hallway. Always the sound of dragging, and always the same feeling that I should have stayed in bed, but I got up. And when I opened the door, he's standing right there. I never take back roads anymore. No detours, no strange motels. I don't even trust highway rest stops at night. I always look twice when I check into a room, especially if the door faces a parking lot, and I never ever stay in room 3. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The idea was simple. 6 friends, 3 cars, 2 weeks off work, and the open road. We weren't teenagers anymore, but we were close enough, early 30s, still chasing that feeling of freedom we all missed from college. The plan was to drive from Denver to Seattle, cutting through remote places, scenic routes, and as few highways as possible. None of us wanted the beaten path. We wanted dusty gas stations, mom-and-pop diners, the kind of Americana you only see if you let yourself get lost. It was me, Mark, along with my girlfriend Lila and our friends, Evan and his fiancée Teresa, and Aaron and his younger sister Emily, who had just graduated college. We split up into 3 cars, Lila and I in my black Honda, Evan and Teresa in his truck, and Aaron and Emily in her Subaru. We had walkie-talkies to keep in touch when service dropped. Everyone was excited, high on the idea of taking photos under obscure road signs and getting drunk in a different small town each night. Things started out perfectly. We hit tiny towns with names like Elks Pass and Widow Creek. We ate blueberry pie at a diner run by a woman who insisted we call her Grams, and we drank whiskey by a lake under more stars than any of us had seen in years. For a while, it felt like the road was our own private world. The shift started after we stopped at a rest area in northern Idaho, about 4 days in. It was the kind of place that should have been torn down decades ago. A single bathroom building, 2 vending machines, and an empty parking lot surrounded by trees. There was no signage except a half-rotted wooden board that might have once held a map. We pulled in late, around 9 p.m., intending just to stretch and switch drivers. The place was dead silent, not the usual quiet of a rural spot, more like the kind where you suddenly feel like you're underwater. No crickets, no wind. Even our footsteps sounded muffled. Teresa was the first to say it. "Something's off here." Evan laughed, but it didn't sound right. "You're just spooked because it's dark." "No," she said, more firmly. "I mean, doesn't this feel wrong to anyone?" Emily walked to the women's restroom. She was inside for maybe 2 minutes when she screamed. We all ran. She was standing near the sink, pale as a sheet, staring at the mirror. There was nothing visibly wrong. No one else there, no blood, no animal, but she was shaking and she couldn't talk for a minute. When she finally did, she kept saying the same thing. There was someone behind me, in the mirror. I saw her. We tried to calm her down. Lila went in, checked the stalls, the mirror, everything. Nothing. No signs of anyone. Eventually, Emily swore she must have imagined it. That's what we all told ourselves. We should have left right then, but instead, we got back in our cars and drove another hour to a town called Mercer's Hollow. None of us had heard of it, but it showed up on the paper map Aaron brought. It wasn't on Google, but the road sign said it was just off Route 29, and we were all tired. Mercer's Hollow didn't look abandoned, but it felt like no one lived there. There were streetlights, all flickering yellow. A general store that was closed, a gas station where the pumps looked functional, but no one was inside. We found a motel on the edge of town called the Shady Pines Inn. It looked straight out of 1965, like it hadn't been renovated in decades. No other cars in the lot, but the front desk was manned, barely. The man behind the counter was paper thin and didn't look up once, just handed us 3 keys and took cash. No small talk, no receipt, no ID. Each room was almost identical. Wood-paneled walls, shag carpet, and a strong smell of old cleaning supplies. We were all exhausted. After a few beers in the parking lot, we went to bed. That night, I woke up to a sound in the room. Not from outside. Inside. It was like scratching, faint and rhythmic, coming from the wall behind the bed. I thought it might be rats or an old pipe. Lila didn't hear it at first. But then it got louder. More deliberate. Like someone dragging their nails along the wall just behind us. We turned on the lights. It stopped. The wall was solid wood. No vents, no water lines. We even checked outside, thinking maybe it was a tree branch. Nothing. Evan and Teresa had it worse. The next morning, Teresa came to our room looking like she hadn't slept at all. She said Evan woke up screaming, said someone was standing in their room, a woman, long black hair, no eyes. She just stood there, whispering something. When he turned on the light, she vanished. Evan refused to talk about it. We agreed to leave immediately. But the town had changed. The road we came in on, gone. Completely. We followed it out for a few miles, and it dead-ended at a thick wall of trees that weren't there the night before. We're turned around, Aaron said, trying to stay calm. The wrong exit. We went back, retraced everything, but no matter which direction we took, we always ended up back at the motel. It was like the town folded in on itself. We stayed another night, not by choice. That night I didn't sleep at all. Lila kept muttering in her sleep, strange words, not English. Her eyes would flicker open and then roll back. I shook her awake twice, but she didn't remember any of it. I heard the scratching again, louder, and then I heard my name, soft, right by my ear. Mark. I jumped out of bed, spun around. No one. But the room was freezing cold. My breath came out in clouds. Lila's lips were turning blue. In the morning, Emily was gone. Gone. Door locked from the inside, shoes by the bed, phone still charging. No sign of her. We tore the town apart. Nothing. No one had seen her. The gas station was still empty. The general store still locked. The motel manager was gone. Aaron broke down, screamed at us, at the town, at the sky. He started walking, just walking down the road. We couldn't stop him. He never came back. That night, Evan and Teresa's room caught fire. No explanation. We heard the smoke alarm, the screaming, saw the orange light flickering under their door. By the time we forced it open, the fire was gone. Not burned out, just gone. No damage. No smoke. But Teresa was unconscious. Evan was gone. Lila and I were the only ones left. We tried everything. Breaking windows, driving off-road. We even tried walking all night in one direction. Every time, we ended up back in Mercer's Hollow. It was like a trap. On the last night, Lila vanished too. I woke up to the sound of whispering louder than before. I could hear it clearly now. She's ours. She's ours. You stayed too long. Now you belong. I tried to run, but the door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't break. I screamed until my throat gave out, and then silence. A light knock at the door. 3 times. I opened it. Slowly. No one. But down the hall, I saw them. Emily, Aaron, Evan, Teresa, Lila, all standing still, faces blank, eyes black, just staring. Then they turned and walked down the hall. I followed them. I don't know why. Maybe part of me already knew it was over, but when I stepped outside, I was somewhere else. Bright sunlight, a highway, a rest area with a clean bathroom and working vending machines, cars driving past. I was holding Lila's phone. It had no photos, no messages, no trace of the trip. Everyone else was gone. I walked to the edge of the road and flagged down a car. A couple took me to the nearest police station. I told them everything. They looked up Mercer's Hollow. It didn't exist, not on any map, not in any county records, not even as an old ghost town. The motel? Never built. The road? Dead-ended 40 years ago. They searched for my friends, issued missing person reports, but they stopped calling me back after a while. No one found anything. Sometimes I drive, hoping to find that turn again, that one road that shouldn't be there. Hoping to see them one more time. I don't sleep much. I still hear the whispering. Sometimes I dream of the motel. Room 6, the wood-paneled walls, the woman with no eyes, and always, always those 3 soft knocks. Story the end.
Story number 3.
We planned the road trip for months. It was supposed to be something lighthearted and nostalgic. 4 college friends reconnecting after graduation before life got too busy. Amanda, Chris, Nathan, and I had been close since our sophomore year, and none of us had really seen each other much since we'd started jobs and moved to different parts of the country. So we picked a central route and agreed to meet in Albuquerque, rent a car, and take a scenic trip through New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Utah. We packed snacks, playlists, a couple of disposable cameras, and figured we'd stay in roadside motels and camp when we felt like it. The first few days went how you'd expect. Laughter, long drives through beautiful desolation, and late-night talks under the stars. We hit Monument Valley, camped near the petrified forest, and even made a detour to see the meteor crater. There wasn't a strict plan. That was the point. It was about spontaneity. It was on the 5th day that something shifted. We were heading northwest out of a town called Holbrook, aiming to cross into Utah by nightfall. Nathan was driving, Chris was up front navigating, and Amanda and I were in the back. We were listening to music, not really talking much, just watching the endless landscape roll past us. We'd been seeing fewer and fewer cars, no gas stations, no houses, just red rocks and brittle shrubs. Chris pointed to a cut-off road that wasn't on the GPS. "Hey, this might be a scenic route," he said. The sign read, Old Pine Ridge Road. He looked it up quickly and said it connected back to the highway eventually. Might save us an hour, or at least keep us from getting bored. Nathan shrugged and took the turn. That road was strange from the start. Narrow, cracked pavement, almost too narrow for 2 cars, though we didn't see another vehicle for miles. It wound through increasingly steep cliffs and dark patches of pine forest, even though the rest of the desert had been dry and flat. We figured we were just gaining elevation. We drove for about 20 minutes without seeing anything. Then we passed a cabin. It looked abandoned, wood rotting, a caved-in roof, windows broken. But what stood out was that it didn't look old, at least not old enough to explain the level of decay. It was like it had collapsed in on itself unnaturally fast. There were no paths leading to it, no mailbox, just sitting there, alone on the edge of a pine grove. Amanda commented on how creepy it looked. Chris said it gave him a weird feeling. Nathan slowed the car a little as we passed, but didn't stop. Not long after, Amanda started feeling nauseous. She rolled down her window and leaned her head out, said the air felt wrong. Thick. Nathan joked that it was the snacks, but she looked genuinely pale. Then came the fog. It rolled in fast, so fast it was like it hadn't been natural at all. 1 minute the road was clear, the next we couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. Nathan slowed the car down to a crawl, and Chris pulled up the GPS again, but the signal had cut out. No reception, no Wi-Fi, no satellite map. Then the engine sputtered. Not stalled, just hiccuped. And again, like it couldn't get enough air. Nathan gripped the wheel tighter and muttered something about elevation again, but we were all tense. Amanda was curled up now, eyes shut, saying she felt dizzy and cold. The road turned to gravel without warning. We hadn't seen a sign. Just suddenly, asphalt gave way to sharp rocks and loose sand. The car bumped and jostled as Nathan kept us moving forward. None of us spoke. We were all watching the fog swirl unnaturally close around the car, like it was moving on its own. It clung to the glass, thick and wet, and it didn't seem to be dispersing. We came to a fork. The left path looked narrow and overgrown. The right had an old wooden sign next to it. The lettering was worn, but we could make out something faint. Prospect Hollow, 3 miles. Chris stared at it. "This place isn't on the map," he said, "even the printed one." We had a quick argument about which way to go, but Nathan made the decision without saying anything. He turned right. The road to Prospect Hollow was worse, narrower, more uneven. Trees pressed in close. There were claw marks on some of the trunks, or what looked like them. And Amanda whimpered softly from the back seat. Then we saw a town. At least that's what it looked like. A small cluster of buildings, barely visible through the fog. A church with a steeple, a general store, a gas station with a rusted-out pump. All of them were in various states of decay. The town looked like it hadn't been inhabited for decades. But none of us said that out loud. We just pulled in slowly, unsure if this was some historical site or something else entirely. Nathan parked in front of the store, and we all got out. The silence was heavy, like sound itself didn't travel here. No wind, no birds, no insects. Amanda threw up the moment she stepped out. "I think we should go," I said. "Something's not right." Nathan agreed, but Chris was already walking toward the church. "Just a quick look," he called out. Amanda sat on the curb, shaking. I went after Chris. The church doors were open, and inside it was dark, but not pitch black. The pews were intact, but the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. At the front, the pulpit had fallen sideways, and behind it, painted on the back wall, was a massive symbol I didn't recognize. It wasn't a cross. It was circular, almost like a maze, with jagged lines through it, red paint, or something that looked like paint. Chris stood in the middle of the aisle, frozen. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I didn't, but I looked around. The air inside was colder than outside, damp, like a cave. Then we heard the door slam behind us. We ran to it, locked, from the outside. I pounded on the door and screamed. A moment later, it opened. Nathan was standing there, eyes wide. "Where the hell did you two go?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" I said. "We've been in here less than a minute." "You've been gone for over an hour," he said. Amanda started freaking out. Then she passed out. We ran back to the car. Amanda was in the back seat, sweating, twitching. Her lips were blue. We decided we were leaving. Right then, Nathan started the car. It stuttered but turned over. We backed out of the dusty lot and started driving back the way we came. But it wasn't the same road. Nothing looked the same. The gravel was darker. The trees weren't the same shape. And now there were no tire tracks behind us, like the road had swallowed them. The fog followed us for miles. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it was gone, and we were back on asphalt, just like that, as if we'd passed through some invisible threshold. Amanda woke up not long after. She didn't remember anything, just said she had the worst headache of her life. We didn't talk much the rest of the way. We drove until we reached a recognizable town, Flagstaff, and booked a hotel. All 4 of us slept for nearly 12 hours. The next morning, we tried to find Prospect Hollow online. Nothing, not even historical references. No pictures, no mentions. We checked old maps at the visitor center. Nothing. Chris started having dreams. He told us about them 2 nights later. Dreams of being in that church, of the symbol on the wall, of people standing in the pews staring at him, their eyes hollow. No faces, just mouths. Nathan admitted he'd seen something in the woods on the drive out, something crawling, huge, black, something that didn't move like an animal. Amanda didn't say anything at all. She left early, took a bus home. We didn't see her again after that. A few months later, Chris died in his sleep. A brain aneurysm, they said. His girlfriend found him in bed with his eyes open and blood coming from his nose. At the funeral, Nathan asked me if I ever saw the fog again. I lied and said no. But I did. Twice. Both times while driving alone at night. Both times I heard whispering from the back seat. Both times I kept driving until it was gone. I think something followed us out of that place. I don't think it wanted us there, but once we crossed into its space, it didn't let go. There are places that aren't on maps, places that don't follow the rules. And sometimes, if you take the wrong road at the wrong time, you find one, or it finds you. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The idea came together after a few drinks one night at Adam's apartment. It was late September, just as the first signs of fall were starting to creep into the air, and the four of us, me, Adam, Jordan, and Cassie, decided to take one last road trip before the weather turned cold and we were stuck inside with nothing but school and work. We were all in our mid-20s, working part-time jobs or going back to school, and none of us had much money, but Adam's uncle had lent him a beat-up old Chevy Suburban that could fit all of us, plus our gear. We planned to drive from our place in central Illinois down through Kentucky, then through the Smoky Mountains, and end up at a cabin Jordan's cousin owned somewhere near Asheville. It wasn't exactly mapped out in detail. We liked it that way. We figured we'd sleep in the car or find cheap motels along the way. The first couple of days were what you'd expect. Long drives, pit stops at weird little diners, lots of old rock and country music playing through the static of the truck's busted radio. We had a good time, laughed a lot, the kind of aimless fun that feels like it'll go on forever. It was the third night, somewhere in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, when things shifted. We were coming down a narrow road after sunset, looking for a place to sleep. The GPS had gone in and out for the last hour, and none of our phones had service. The road had gone from pavement to gravel, and then gravel to dirt, and the hills on either side seemed to close in tighter as we went along. Every once in a while, we'd pass an old leaning fence or a rotted post with a sign too faded to read. There were no lights, no houses, just trees and darkness. Jordan was driving, eyes squinting at the road. "We need to find somewhere to pull off soon," he said. "I'm not about to drive off a cliff because we can't see." "We could sleep in the car," Cassie offered. "Just find a wide spot and call it good." We were all tired and starting to get that irritable edge that comes after too many hours in the car. Then Adam spoke up from the back seat. "Look, there, on the left. Is that a driveway?" It was barely noticeable. A break in the trees with 2 rusted metal posts and what might have once been a gate lying broken in the weeds. The dirt path behind it curved out of sight. We all hesitated. Then Jordan shrugged. "Worth a look." We drove up the path, which was more rutted and overgrown than I liked, but after about a quarter mile it opened into a clearing. There was a small 1-story building in the middle. Not a house exactly, it looked more like an old ranger station or visitor center. The roof sagged on one end and part of the front porch had collapsed. A sign next to the door, hanging by one chain, read, "Bear Creek Rest Stop, Est 1974. "Perfect," Adam said, grabbing his bag. "Spooky, abandoned building in the woods. This is the good stuff." We all laughed a little, nerves loosened by the relief of stopping. We agreed to sleep in the truck and maybe poke around the building in the morning just to stretch our legs before moving on. The night was colder than we expected. We cracked the windows slightly and bundled up in our sleeping bags, each of us trying to find a way to get comfortable. I woke up sometime later. It was that weird gray pre-dawn light and everything was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no bugs, no birds, just dead silence. I glanced around. Adam was asleep in the back, snoring softly. Cassie was curled up against the passenger door. Jordan was sitting upright in the driver's seat, staring ahead. "You good?" I asked groggily. He didn't look at me, just kept staring. "Jordan?" He finally blinked like he'd been snapped out of something. "Did you see that?" He whispered. "What?" He looked back toward the building. "I thought I saw someone inside, a light or something, just for a second." I looked. The building was dark, same as it had been. "You were probably dreaming with your eyes open," I said. "Happens when you're exhausted." He didn't answer. That morning, we checked out the building. The front door was barely hanging on. Inside, it smelled like mold and animals. There were a couple of broken benches, a counter with old pamphlets scattered across the floor, and a back hallway that led to what looked like storage rooms or offices. Cassie and I wandered to the back. One of the rooms had a set of filing cabinets, all open and empty. The other was worse. The door had deep gouges across it, scratches like someone had dragged something metal or sharp along the wood. "Okay, this place is giving me bad vibes," Cassie said. "I agree." We headed out, found the guys by the truck, and packed up without much talking. Nobody wanted to admit it, but something about the place felt off. Later that day, we got back to a real road and found a diner with working restrooms and warm food. Jordan seemed jumpy, checking the mirrors more than usual. Cassie asked if he was okay, and he just said, "I think we brought something with us." We laughed it off. But that night, parked near a rest area on the edge of Tennessee, things got worse. It was around 2 a.m. when Adam bolted upright from his sleeping bag in the back and screamed. We all woke up instantly. "What the hell, man?" Jordan said. Adam looked around wild-eyed. "She was in here," he said. "She was in the car." "Who?" He shook his head. "I don't know. A woman, dirty face, eyes black. She was sitting right next to me." "You were dreaming," I said. "I felt her," he insisted, "the weight on the seat, breathing next to me." We were all rattled. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night, and when I did, I had this dream of standing in the woods while someone whispered right into my ear, but I couldn't move. The next day, we argued about whether to keep going or turn back. Jordan was done. He wanted out. Adam said he didn't care, but he hadn't stopped shaking since the night before. Cassie was the only one who wanted to keep going. "Maybe it's just stress," she said. "Maybe we're psyching ourselves out." We decided to head to Asheville early and just stay at the cabin a few days. But on the way there, while we were stopped at a gas station small town, things escalated. I was standing in the aisle of the store picking out snacks when the lights flickered and the air got cold. Not a breeze, like the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a second. The cashier glanced up confused, and then I heard it again. That whisper. This time, close enough that I could feel breath on my neck. I spun around. No one was there. Outside, Cassie stood frozen by the gas pump, staring at the woods across the street. When I got to her, she said nothing, just pointed. In the trees, deep in the shadows, a shape stood, pale and unmoving. A woman in a long dress, face gray and distant, eyes so black they didn't even reflect light. She stood still, not blinking, not swaying with the wind like everything else around her. When I blinked, she was gone. We didn't speak as we got back in the truck. Everyone saw something. Everyone was shaken. The cabin was supposed to be a refuge, but that night, none of us slept. Footsteps moved across the porch. Lights flickered without power. Cassie swore she saw someone standing at the end of the hallway at 3 a.m. just watching. The next morning, we packed up without eating and left. We drove for 15 hours, nonstop, back to Illinois. Every minute of that drive, it felt like something was riding with us. A pressure, a presence, something waiting. After we got home, none of us were the same. Jordan sold his car, moved back in with his parents, and stopped answering messages. Adam dropped out of school. Cassie went to see a priest, even though she wasn't religious. I started waking up at 3:17 a.m. every night for weeks, always feeling watched. I researched Bear Creek Rest Stop. Nothing. It wasn't on any map. No record of it existing. But we were there. We stood inside it. We walked through its halls, and whatever was there followed us. I don't take road trips anymore, not because I'm scared of getting lost, but because I'm afraid I won't come back alone. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I was never the type to believe in ghost stories. I thought they were exaggerated tales people told over campfires or during power outages. But that changed the summer of 2019, when my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the Midwest. We had just graduated college, and it felt like the right way to celebrate before adulthood pulled us in different directions. There were 4 of us, me, Matt, Jess, and Lauren. We took Matt's dad's old Dodge Caravan, loaded it with snacks, coolers, camping gear, and an old Bluetooth speaker that only worked when it felt like it. Our plan was simple. No itinerary, no deadlines, just the open road and wherever it took us. We started in Ohio and aimed to make it to South Dakota and back in 2 weeks. The first 5 days were amazing. We visited roadside attractions, took photos in front of weird sculptures, and camped at quiet parks where we drink cheap beer under the stars. I don't remember the name of the town we passed when things started to go wrong. I don't think I ever saw a sign. It was somewhere in Iowa. We'd taken a detour to avoid heavy traffic on the interstate, ended up on a long, winding 2-lane road that stretched into farmland and eventually into thick patches of forest. The sun had dipped low, and Jess, who was driving, said we should find a place to stop for the night. The GPS showed no campsites for miles, but Matt pointed out a gravel turnoff that looked promising. We followed it and came across a strange, overgrown clearing. A rusted sign read Black Hollow Rest Area. It looked abandoned. The grass was waist-high in some places, and the wooden picnic tables were chipped and faded gray. But there was a clearing large enough to pitch our tents, and after a full day of driving, we weren't picky. We set up quickly and built a small fire. The air was unnaturally still, and I remember noticing how quiet everything was. No crickets, no birds, not even the wind rustling the trees. It was like the forest was holding its breath. Matt cracked jokes to cut the tension. Lauren sipped whiskey straight from the bottle and tried to get us to tell scary stories. Jess kept checking her phone, frustrated that she couldn't get a signal. Sometime around midnight, we all turned in. I shared a tent with Matt. Jess and Lauren took the other one. I remember lying awake for a while, staring at the tent ceiling, wondering why I felt so uneasy. There was this pressure in the air, like something was watching us from the tree line. I thought it was just nerves, or maybe my imagination running wild after too much ghost talk. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not animal footsteps. These were slow, deliberate, heavy, human. They circled the tent once, crunching the dry leaves and sticks, then stopped at the entrance. I held my breath. Matt was already asleep, breathing softly beside me. The footsteps started again, slower now, pacing in front of the tent flap. I whispered, "Matt," but he didn't stir. Then I saw the silhouette. Someone, or something, was standing just inches away, casting a faint shadow through the nylon. It didn't move. It just stood there, facing the tent. I don't know how long it lasted. I must have blacked out or fallen asleep from sheer terror, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. The sunlight was shining through the tent, birds chirping like nothing had happened. I thought maybe I dreamed it. But then I saw the footprints. Clear, heavy boot prints circled our tent. No other marks, no tire tracks, no signs of another camper or hiker nearby. Just one set of boots, pacing. I called the others over. Jess looked pale the second she saw them. She said she heard footsteps too, but assumed it was one of us going to the bathroom. Lauren laughed nervously and shrugged it off, saying we'd probably been visited by some weirdo drifter. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. We packed up quickly and got back on the road. The GPS finally kicked back in, and we found a diner about 30 miles away. We didn't talk much during breakfast, all of us distracted, glancing at the windows and doors and the door like we expected someone to follow us in. After that night, strange things kept happening. The next evening, we stayed at a proper campground near a small town. It was crowded, families everywhere, laughter, dogs barking. We should have felt safe. But around 2 a.m., Jess woke up screaming. She said she saw someone standing at the edge of the woods, right near the bathrooms, staring at her. When she shone her flashlight at them, they vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. We all ran over half asleep and freaked out. There was no one there, just a faint smell, rotting leaves and something else, something metallic. We searched with our flashlights, but found nothing. No footprints this time. Still, it rattled us. The next morning, Matt noticed his watch was gone. A cheap silver wristwatch he always wore. He swore he left it on the picnic table while brushing his teeth, but it was nowhere to be found. That night, we drove further west, trying to shake the paranoia. We passed through a series of small towns, all of them oddly quiet. Windows shuttered, stores closed early. No one on the streets after dark. One gas station we stopped at had a clerk who stared at us the entire time we fueled up. I tried to joke with him, ask about local attractions, but he just said, "You kids should be careful around here." "Why?" I asked. "Strangers go missing on these roads. Been happening a long time." Then he walked into the back and never came out. We didn't stop again for a while after that. The breaking point came 3 nights later. We'd found a rest area along a desolate stretch of highway near the Nebraska-South Dakota border. It looked clean, new, bright lights, vending machines. There were no other cars. We decided to sleep in the van that night, just to be safe. We locked the doors, cracked the windows for air, and tried to get comfortable. I was in the front passenger seat. Jess and Lauren curled up in the back. Matt was behind the wheel. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up, not because of a sound, but because the air in the van suddenly turned freezing, like see your breath cold. I looked around, and to my horror, every window was completely fogged from the inside, covered in handprints, small ones, dozens of them. Matt stirred and looked around groggily. What the hell? Then we heard it. Knocking. From the roof. Tap, 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 tap. I leaned forward slowly and looked up through the windshield. Something was crouched on top of the van. Its limbs were long, joints bent the wrong way, face pressed to the glass like it was trying to see in. It didn't have eyes, just empty, dark sockets. We screamed. Matt started the van and peeled out of the rest area so fast he nearly clipped a trash can. The thing held on for a few seconds, then vanished into the darkness behind us. We didn't stop driving until the sun came up. We pulled into a church parking lot in a small town and sat there for hours, too scared to talk, too scared to sleep. Eventually, we started the long drive home, cutting the trip short. Even back home, things didn't feel normal. I had nightmares for weeks, dreams of someone standing at the foot of my bed, dreams of cold fingers brushing against my skin. Jess moved back in with her parents. Matt deleted all the photos from the trip without telling us why. Lauren refused to talk about any of it and blocked us for a while. I did some research in the months after. I looked up Black Hollow, that rest area where it all began. I found nothing in the state records. No maps listed it. It was like it never existed. But in a thread on an obscure paranormal forum, I found one mention. A guy claimed to have camped there in 1996, said he woke up to find his friend gone, vanished. All that was left were boot prints circling his tent. He said he never found the place again either. I don't know what we stumbled into. Maybe we crossed into somewhere we weren't supposed to be, or maybe something followed us out of that forest. All I know is something was with us, watching us. And when we left, it didn't. It's been years now. The others don't talk about it. But I still look over my shoulder when I drive at night, and sometimes I wake up to fog on my windows and handprints. Story, the end.
Story number 6.
We had been planning the road trip for months. It was supposed to be the perfect escape. A week away from work, from the pressures of life, just me, my best friend Sarah, and a long stretch of highway. Our destination was a little-known spot in the Rocky Mountains, a secluded cabin that belonged to a friend of a friend. The idea was simple, to spend a few days away from everything. No phones, no distractions, just the wilderness and each other. We left on a Friday afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the sprawling plains as we drove out of the city. The car, an old Toyota Corolla I'd inherited from my dad, wasn't much to look at, but it had a sense of reliability. It hummed along the highway as we chatted about everything, about the memories we hoped to make, about our plans after the trip, and about all the things we had left behind. The hours passed quickly, and by dusk, we were far from the city. The highway had narrowed, the landscape shifting from vast, open fields to dense, shadowed woods. The only lights on the road were the headlights of our car and the occasional flicker of distant farms. "Do you think we'll be able to find the cabin?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat, her voice a little more tentative than usual. I glanced at the map. The directions were vague. Turn left at the old barn, then follow the gravel road for 5 miles. The kind of directions that made you think you had to know the place to find it. "We'll find it," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. As we drove deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with the weight of the evening fog. The road twisted and turned, and we started to feel as if we were the only people in the world. The silence in the car grew, replaced by a soft, haunting rustling of leaves outside the windows. It wasn't until we passed a sign that read, "Next services 50 miles, that I realized we hadn't seen a single other car for over an hour. I'd always thought there was something eerie about roads like this, roads that seemed to go on forever, with no indication of where they were heading. It wasn't quite dark yet, but the light was fading fast. "Should we pull over and check the map again?" Sarah asked, a slight edge of nervousness in her voice. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure we needed to. I had a sense of the road from the directions we had. We'd get there soon, I told myself. We found a small pull-off beside a forest clearing. I stopped the car, and we both got out to stretch our legs. The air was cooler now, and the only sounds were the chirping of distant crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Sarah went to the back of the car to grab a snack, and I dug around in the glove compartment for the map. The headlights cast long shadows across the clearing. When I unfolded the map, it felt like we were the only two people in a vast wilderness. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, walking back over to me with a granola bar in hand. I nodded, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had crept up on me. "Yeah, just making sure we're on track." I looked up and caught sight of something in the distance, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just inside the tree line. At first, I thought it was someone walking toward us, maybe another hiker or someone with a campsite nearby. But as I squinted, the figure didn't move. It was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like a long, dark coat. "Do you see that?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. She followed my gaze and nodded slowly, her face paling. "Yeah. What is that?" "I don't know," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "Maybe it's just someone out for a walk." But as we watched, the figure didn't move any closer. It just stood there, staring at us. We stood frozen for a moment, the only sounds the rustling of the trees and the distant calls of birds. I glanced back at the car, suddenly feeling very far from civilization. Without thinking, I quickly got back into the car, and Sarah followed. I started the engine, my hands trembling slightly as I shifted the car into drive. The headlights shone briefly on the figure as we pulled away. But it remained where it was, motionless. For a few minutes, the only sound in the car was the hum of the engine, and neither of us spoke. I couldn't shake the image of the figure standing in the trees, its eyes somehow hollow, even from the distance. It was like it was waiting for something, or maybe just watching us. "Do you think we should go back?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. It just felt wrong. I shook my head, trying to push away the unease. "We're fine. It was probably just some weird coincidence. Let's keep going. We'll be there soon." But as we drove further into the woods, the feeling didn't go away. It lingered in the back of my mind like a low hum in the air. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing into the rearview mirror. The darkness behind us felt oppressive, like something was following us, but I told myself it was just nerves. We continued down the winding road, the headlights illuminating the twisted trunks of trees that reached like fingers into the night. The road was getting narrower, the turns sharper. It felt like we were losing track of time, and the deepening darkness around us seemed to consume the space between the trees. Just as I was about to say something, the car suddenly jolted, throwing us both forward. I slammed on the brakes, heart racing. "What the hell was that?" Sarah gasped, her hand clutching the seatbelt. I tried to catch my breath and looked out the window. There, in the middle of the road, was a large black shape. It looked like a person, but its movements were wrong, too jerky, as if it was twitching in place. My mind screamed at me to drive away, but something kept me frozen in place. The figure stood motionless for a moment, then slowly turned its head toward us. There was something unsettling about the way it moved, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by invisible strings. It took a step forward, and I saw its face for the first time. It was pale, too pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into my soul. Its lips were drawn tight, as if it had never smiled, and the skin was stretched too thin, too tight. "Drive, now!" screamed, her voice full of terror. I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the car into reverse, my foot slamming the pedal as I backed up quickly. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. I spun the wheel and turned the car around, heart hammering in my chest. We sped back down the road, faster now, the headlights barely illuminating the twists and turns ahead. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, something just out of sight, watching from the edges of the trees. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, neither of us speaking as the tension in the air thickened. Every so often, I would glance at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure in the distance, but there was nothing, just the empty road behind us. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I spotted the sign for the nearest town. It was barely more than a dot on the map, but at that moment, it felt like salvation. We pulled into the first gas station we saw and got out of the car, our legs unsteady. "We're staying here tonight," I said, my voice shaking. Sarah nodded, looking pale and wide-eyed. "I don't care where we are. I don't care how far we've come. I'm not going anywhere near that road again." We rented a room at the gas station, the old woman behind the counter eyeing us curiously but not asking any questions. That night, we locked the door and kept the lights on. The silence was deafening, but it was the only thing that calmed us. The next morning, we drove out of town, not looking back. We never talked about it again, but we both knew that whatever we had encountered that night, it was something we couldn't explain, something that shouldn't have been there. To this day, I can't drive through the woods at night without remembering that figure, those hollow eyes, and the terrible stillness that hung in the air. Story the end.
Story number 7.
We had been planning the road trip for months. It was supposed to be the last adventure before everything changed, before we all graduated, started jobs, and moved on with our lives. Just 4 friends, me, Aaron, Megan, and Jake, taking a week to drive through the western U.S. from Los Angeles to Seattle, making stops along the way in small towns and scenic places we'd only heard about from travel blogs. It started off well, like any road trip does. We spent the first day driving through California, laughing and talking about anything and everything. We didn't have a real plan, just a rough outline of where we wanted to stop. We hit some great diners, took way too many photos at random roadside attractions, and listened to a mix of music that somehow never got old. The mood was light and carefree. But by the time we crossed into Oregon, things started to feel different. Maybe it was the weather. It had started to rain heavily, the kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller, like everything's being shut out. We had been in the car for hours, and the idea of stopping at another roadside motel didn't seem so appealing. The rain seemed to make every shadow stretch longer, and the forest along the road seemed darker, somehow more oppressive. But we kept driving, hoping we'd find a place to stop for the night. That's when we saw it, off in the distance, through the mist and rain, a small old motel. It looked a little out of place, as if it had been abandoned for years. But the neon sign was on, a faint red glow cutting through the haze. The Willow Inn. We didn't even have to discuss it. We just pulled off the highway and made our way down the gravel driveway toward the motel. It was late, around midnight, and we were all exhausted, so we figured it would be better to stop now than risk driving through the night. The place looked old, like something straight out of a 1950s postcard. The small office was on the left, a few rooms spread out in a U-shape around a central courtyard. There were only a couple of cars in the parking lot, and the lights were dim. It had that quiet, eerie feel of a place that hadn't seen visitors in a long time. We got out of the car, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. Aaron went inside to talk to the receptionist, an older man who looked as though he'd been up for hours. He had a gruff, but not unfriendly demeanor. "We've got a few rooms left," he said, not making eye contact as he shuffled through a stack of papers behind the counter. "Cash only, though. $40 a night." Megan, who always had a nervous energy about her, leaned in and asked if there was anything weird about the place. He gave her a quick, hard look, his expression unreadable. "This place has been around a long time, nothing to worry about." Aaron handed him the money, and we made our way to the rooms. Room 7 was at the far end of the lot. It had a flickering porch light and a door that creaked as I opened it. The room inside was small, old-fashioned, with worn furniture and a faded carpet. There was a musty smell that seemed to hang in the air, but it was better than driving through the night in the rain. We unpacked quickly, barely speaking. It was getting late, and all we wanted was sleep. But as I settled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The room felt off. The air was still, but there was a heaviness to it, like the walls themselves were breathing. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was just tired. After a while, I heard Megan's voice, low and shaky. "Guys, Do you hear that? I sat up, straining to listen. At first, I thought it was just the rain against the windows, but then I realized it was something else, a faint noise, like a tapping or a scratching coming from the far corner of the room near the window. I looked over at the others. They were staring, wide-eyed. Aaron, ever the skeptic, stood up and walked toward the window. He pulled back the curtains and glanced outside. Nothing, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. It's just the wind. But Megan wasn't convinced. No, there's something in here. Something wrong. I told them it was probably just the old building settling, the wind making the wood creak, but I could tell they weren't buying it. Aaron stood there for a moment longer, looking out the window before he came back to the bed. You know, I've been thinking, he said, sitting down. That guy at the front desk, he seemed, I don't know, off. He didn't even look us in the eyes. Jake, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. I noticed that too. And the whole place, it's like it's stuck in time. Nothing feels like it's moved forward here. Look at the decor, the wallpaper, the furniture. It's like we're in the past. We all sat there for a while, listening to the rain and the occasional creak from the walls. Then, at around 3 a.m., we heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate, coming from the door. I froze. Did you hear that? Megan whispered, her voice trembling. We all nodded. Aaron walked to the door slowly, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. There was no one there, just the empty parking lot, rain falling in sheets. Someone's messing with us, Aaron muttered, but I could tell he didn't believe it. None of us did. There was something unsettling about this place. It wasn't just the rain or the isolation. It was the feeling that something was watching us, that we weren't alone. We tried to go back to sleep, but it was impossible. The tapping sound from earlier started again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the window anymore. It was coming from the bathroom. I don't know how long we sat there listening to it, trying to make sense of what was happening. Finally, Megan couldn't take it anymore. I'm going to check it out, she said, her voice tight with fear. We all tried to stop her, but she was already up, walking toward the bathroom door. The room was so still now, the silence pressing in on us like a physical weight. Megan opened the bathroom door and we all held our breath. She stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind her. We heard her gasp and then nothing. The room went deathly quiet. Megan, I called, my voice cracking. Megan? The door creaked open slowly and she stepped out, pale as a ghost. Her eyes were wide, her face frozen in shock. There's something in there, she whispered. I looked toward the bathroom, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I could feel the weight of the room, the coldness seeping into my bones. We stood there for what felt like hours, too afraid to speak. Then we heard it again. The knocking. But this time it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the wall, right beside the bed. We all looked at each other, our faces pale, our bodies stiff with fear. I don't know how, but we all knew what we had to do. We packed up our things in silence, not saying a word, just moving as quickly as we could. The entire time, the knocking never stopped. We rushed out of the room and into the parking lot, not caring that the rain was coming down harder now, soaking us instantly. The old man at the front desk was nowhere to be seen. We jumped into the car, started it up, and drove off without looking back. We didn't talk much on the drive away from the motel. No one mentioned the knocking or the feeling of being watched. We just drove. It wasn't until we stopped for gas a few miles down the road that Aaron finally broke the silence. Do you guys think it was real? He asked quietly. Or was it all just in our heads? None of us had an answer. We didn't talk about the motel again. But every time I passed that stretch of highway, I remember the old man's eyes, the knocking, the feeling of being trapped in that room. And I wonder sometimes what really happened there. Story the end.
Story number 8.
It started like any other road trip. My friends and I had been planning it for months, an open road adventure across the southern United States with no set destination in mind. Just driving and discovering, hoping to find quirky small towns, dive bars, and quiet spots to unwind from the everyday grind. There was me, Sarah, the planner, and my best friends. Catherine, my longtime roommate, Charlie, who had just gotten out of a bad relationship, and Jason, the always sarcastic but surprisingly wise friend who had an obsession with ghost stories. We were all ready to let loose, and the idea of exploring places off the beaten path thrilled us. The plan was simple: drive through Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, finding old gas stations, historic landmarks, and anything weird or unique we could photograph and share on social media. We rented a van, packed up snacks, and set off one Friday morning, laughing and making bets on how many strange things we would find along the way. The first few days were perfect. We laughed at roadside attractions, stopped at antique shops, and pulled over at every small town diner we saw. Nothing out of the ordinary. But everything changed when we hit a tiny town called Barren Ridge, which wasn't even on the map we were using. Jason was the first to notice it. "I don't remember seeing a sign for this place," he said, looking out the window as we drove down the empty highway. "Where are we?" The sun had started to set, and the road had grown eerily quiet. The trees along the sides of the road were dense and dark, casting long shadows across the pavement. "We must have missed a turn somewhere," I said, glancing at my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal. "Let's just stop in and ask for directions," Catherine suggested. "Maybe we can grab dinner here. It's getting late anyway." Jason and Charlie didn't seem convinced, but we all agreed it was best to stop for the night, given how remote the area felt. Barren Ridge didn't seem like much. The main street was narrow, flanked by old brick buildings that looked as though they hadn't been updated in decades. The streetlights cast a soft, yellow glow on the cracked sidewalks, and everything felt oddly still. There were no people in sight. The few cars parked along the street looked as though they hadn't moved in days. We parked in front of a diner and decided to go inside. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and we were immediately greeted by the sharp scent of fried food and the low hum of a jukebox playing a country song. The place was nearly empty. An older woman in her 60s sat behind the counter, cleaning mugs with a rag, her back hunched as if the weight of years had settled on her shoulders. She looked up when we walked in and gave us a long, assessing look. "Well, ain't you all a sight for sore eyes?" she said in a slow southern drawl. "What can I get for you?" We ordered food and sat down at one of the small booths near the window. The place was quiet, too quiet. It felt like the kind of diner where time didn't exist, where the people inside came and went, but the place stayed frozen in time. I glanced at my phone again, but still no signal. I didn't think much of it at the time, figuring it was just a dead zone in the middle of nowhere. As we ate, I started to feel uneasy. The silence was unsettling, and the older woman behind the counter seemed to be watching us a little too closely. I caught her staring at me for a few moments before she quickly turned her head, as though she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. "What's wrong with her?" Jason whispered to me, his voice barely audible. "She's acting strange." I shrugged. "I don't know, maybe she's just lonely. It's a small town." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The longer we stayed, the more I began to feel like we were intruders in some forgotten corner of the world. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see someone standing in the street, just watching us. But the street was empty, as it had been since we arrived. After finishing our meal, we paid the bill and stepped back outside. As we made our way to the van, I noticed a small motel across the street. The neon sign flickered weakly, but it didn't seem like a terrible place to spend the night. "Let's stay here," Charlie suggested. "It's already late, and we could use a place to rest." We all agreed, so we crossed the street and headed to the motel office. The door creaked as we opened it, and the same old woman from the diner was standing behind the counter. "Looking for a room, are ya?" she asked, her voice still slow and deliberate. We nodded, and she handed us a key to one of the rooms. The key was old-fashioned, attached to a large brass tag with the room number on it. The room itself was small but clean enough. There was a single bed with a heavy, faded quilt, a small dresser, and an old-fashioned television that didn't seem to work. The carpet was threadbare, and the walls were covered with floral wallpaper that looked like it had been in place since the 1970s. There was a small window next to the bed, and I pulled back the curtain to see nothing but darkness. The streetlights outside cast a dull glow, but the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. "We should have asked about the town before we decided to stay here," Catherine said, clearly uncomfortable. There's something about this place. It feels wrong. I know what you mean, I admitted. It's like we're stuck in some kind of time warp. Like this town doesn't exist anymore, but we're still here. That night, things got stranger. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move. My body was frozen, and I couldn't make a sound. I tried to scream, but no noise came out. I could hear the others in the room, but they seemed far away. As I struggled to regain control of my body, I heard a low whisper, soft and urgent, coming from the corner of the room. "Get out!" The voice was hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in years, and the words chilled me to my core. I managed to break free from the paralysis and sat up in bed, heart racing. The room was still, and nothing seemed out of place. I checked the time on my phone. 3:07 a.m. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest, but it wouldn't go away. I lay back down, pulling the covers over my head, trying to convince myself it was just a bad dream. But then I heard it again. The whisper. Louder this time. "Get out!" I jumped out of bed, wide awake now. I rushed to the door, but when I tried to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked from the outside, but I couldn't see anyone. Panic started to rise in my chest as I pounded on the door. I screamed, but no one came. Suddenly, the door clicked, and I stumbled out into the hallway. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. I didn't know what was happening, but I had to get out. I had to leave this town. I ran to the van, but when I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of anyone. No lights in the motel, no sound, just a thick, oppressive silence. The town was completely still. And then, through the foggy windows of the motel, I saw it. A figure standing in the window of the diner across the street. The same old woman. She was watching me. I turned and ran. I don't know how, but I made it out of Barren Ridge. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened or if it was just some trick of the mind. But I never went back. None of us ever talked about it again, but I could tell we all felt it. The terror of being trapped in a place that shouldn't exist. I don't know why we ended up there. But I know I never want to find out again. Story the end.
Story number 9.
We had been planning the road trip for almost 6 months. My best friends, Kelly, Anna, and I, were all fresh out of college and wanted to take one last trip before starting our new jobs. We thought it would be the perfect opportunity to experience something new and bond before life pulled us in different directions. The plan was simple. We'd rent a car, drive across the country, and stop at a few major landmarks, all the while camping under the stars whenever we could. No set schedule, just freedom. It was going to be an adventure, and none of us could wait to get started. The first few days were perfect. We drove through the mountains, the desert, and the plains, seeing sights that we'd only seen in movies. We laughed, played games, and talked about the future. There was something about being in a car, driving through endless stretches of road, that made time feel like it slowed down. We would stop at small towns, visit roadside attractions, and take turns telling scary stories to pass the time. But it was on the 4th day of the trip that things began to feel off. It started with a detour. We were heading through a particularly desolate part of Arizona when Kelly suggested we take an old highway she had read about online. The map didn't show much in the way of landmarks, but it looked like a shortcut to our next destination, so we figured it wouldn't hurt. I was a bit uneasy when we turned off the main highway and onto the dusty, narrow road, but Anna assured me that everything was fine. "It's just a small town we'll pass through. It'll be an adventure," she said with a smile. The further we drove, the more the landscape changed. The wide, empty desert gave way to a rocky, hilly terrain. The road seemed to get steeper, and the only signs of life were occasional weather-beaten houses scattered far apart. There were no gas stations, no stores, and no other cars, just the occasional rundown shack. The air was dry, the sun unbearably hot, and the silence outside felt oppressive, like it was pressing in on us. We passed a small sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek, 20 miles. Kelly was driving, but even she seemed on edge now. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and her eyes darted around as if expecting something to appear in the rearview mirror. "What do you think? Should we stop?" Kelly asked, looking at the sign. It's a small town. We could get something to drink, stretch our legs, maybe find a place to camp nearby. Anna nodded. Sounds good. We haven't seen anyone in hours. I was the only one who hesitated. There was something about the town name that sounded strange to me, like it was a place people would avoid if they could. But I kept my thoughts to myself. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We reached the outskirts of Hollow Creek a few minutes later. The town was small, too small to be on any of our maps, and it looked like it hadn't seen much change in years. The buildings were old, most of them abandoned, with cracked windows and peeling paint. The road leading into the town was rough and uneven, and the buildings seemed to sag, as though they were slowly sinking into the earth. We drove slowly through the streets, the silence of the town oppressive. There was no sound at all, not even birds, just the hum of our car's engine and the faint rustling of wind. As we approached what appeared to be the town square, we saw a gas station. It was the only sign of life. The lights were on, but the pumps were old and rusted, and the lot was empty. A single man stood outside, wearing a faded red cap, leaning against the building and staring at us. Kelly slowed down as we passed him, and the man didn't move. His gaze didn't waver, and his eyes seemed to follow us as we drove past. It was unnerving. I couldn't help but shiver. "Should we stop?" Anna asked, already unbuckling her seatbelt. I shook my head. "No, I don't think so. Let's just keep going." But before we could turn around, we heard a sound from behind us. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. We all turned in unison and saw the man walking toward the car, his pace unhurried but determined. He was coming closer. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked nervously, rolling down the window slightly. The man stopped just short of the car and stared at us with wide, unblinking eyes. His face was gaunt, weathered by time and sun, his skin pale and thin, as if he hadn't seen the light of day in years. There was a strange smell in the air now, like old stale dust mixed with something rotten. "Don't stay here too long," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hollow Creek? It's not a place for strangers. You won't leave the same way you came." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine, and Anna's hand instinctively went to the door handle, ready to drive away. "What do you mean?" Kelly asked, her voice shaky. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back slowly, his eyes never leaving ours. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to the gas station, disappearing into the shadows. We sat in stunned silence for a few moments before Kelly muttered, "What the hell was that about?" I didn't have an answer, but the feeling of unease settled deeper in my chest. "Let's just go," I said, my voice tight. "This place feels wrong." Kelly started the car again, and we drove out of town, all of us glancing nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man following us. But there was nothing. The town seemed deserted, abandoned. The road to the other side of Hollow Creek felt even more deserted than before. The hills around us grew steeper, and the trees became sparse, leaving us in the open wilderness once more. We drove for another hour or so without speaking until Anna finally broke the silence. "Can we stop? I need to use the bathroom," she said, her voice strained. Kelly nodded, pulling off the road at a small dirt turnout that looked like it might be a safe place to stop. We all got out of the car and stood in the stillness, the air heavy with the scent of dry earth and the distant sound of wind. There was no sign of any other vehicles, no sign of life at all. Just us and the desolate land stretching out in every direction. Anna went to the trees to relieve herself, while Kelly and I stood by the car, watching the horizon. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Suddenly, I heard Anna scream. I turned around just in time to see her running toward the car, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" Kelly shouted, running toward her. Anna was breathless, her voice shaky. "I saw something in the trees. It was watching me." I felt my blood run cold. "What? What did you see?" Anna looked over her shoulder, her eyes darting between us and the trees. "I don't know. It was just a shape. I couldn't make it out, but I know it was there. I felt it." We didn't waste any more time. We got back in the car as fast as we could, and Kelly sped off down the road, not looking back. But the feeling didn't go away. The sense that we were being followed, the unease in the air, the feeling that something had been watching us all along. We didn't stop again until we reached the next town. And even then, we didn't talk about what happened. It wasn't until the next morning, when we were finally sitting down for breakfast at a diner, that we all admitted something had been wrong with Hollow Creek. We tried to look it up online later, but there was no record of the town. Nothing. No history. It was as if it never existed. Kelly never spoke about the man again. Anna never mentioned what she saw in the trees. But I could tell by the way they looked at me sometimes, the way they would glance nervously over their shoulders when we were in unfamiliar places, that something had changed. Something had followed us from that town, even though we left it behind. I don't know what happened in Hollow Creek. I don't know why it felt like the whole place was a trap, but I know one thing for sure. It wasn't just the town that was empty. Something in it was waiting, and it didn't want us to leave. Story the end.
Story number 10.
It was a spontaneous idea. We were all in our mid-20s, my best friends and I, and we just finished a semester of college exams. The stress of finals combined with the upcoming summer break was eating at us, so we needed an escape. It started as a joke over drinks one night. Adam, ever the one to throw out the wildest plans, suggested we take a road trip. No destination in mind, just a drive, a chance to see the open road and shake off the weight of our responsibilities for a few days. We decided to head west. Adam was the driver, Cassie sat in the passenger seat, and I was in the back with Jordan. We had no real route planned, just a vague idea to head through the Midwest and eventually make our way into the heart of the Rockies. The trip was supposed to be a time of freedom. No cell service, no commitments, just us, the open road, and whatever strange places we stumbled across. The first couple of days went by without incident. We camped at a few random spots, stayed in dive motels, and ate greasy diner food. It was everything we needed, carefree, spontaneous, and wild. But as we got deeper into the rural stretches of the Midwest, something started to shift in the air. The roads got quieter, the towns less frequent, and the landscape more barren. Adam, who loved exploring unknown paths, suggested we veer off the highway onto a stretch of road that didn't seem to have much traffic at all. It was a dirt road lined with nothing but thick trees and the occasional rusted-out sign. We were on our third day when it happened. Around 10 p.m., we were driving through the flat, empty land of rural Kansas. There was nothing for miles but fields and scrubland, and the road ahead of us seemed to stretch endlessly under the dim glow of the headlights. Adam, always the adventurous one, decided we should stop at a nearby truck stop to grab snacks and stretch our legs. When we pulled up, the place was eerily quiet. The gas pumps were old, the building itself run down and faded with time. There were no other cars, no people around, just the hum of the lights above us. Cassie was the first to notice it. "Does anyone else find this place kind of off?" I nodded, sensing it too. The air felt heavy, like we were being watched. But Adam, ever the optimist, shrugged it off. "It's just a weird little spot. Let's stretch our legs and keep going." We got out of the car and walked into the small, dimly lit convenience store. Inside, the shelves were stocked with dusty cans of beans, bags of chips, and an assortment of energy drinks that didn't look like they had been touched in years. The woman behind the counter, her hair gray and tangled, looked up as we entered, but didn't greet us. She just stared. Her eyes were hollow and her skin was pale, as though she hadn't seen daylight in far too long. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and almost tired. Cassie gave a half smile and nodded. "Just some snacks, I think." We grabbed a few bags of chips and bottles of water, trying to avoid lingering too long in the store. The woman's gaze never left us, even as we paid. As we walked out the door, Jordan pulled me aside. "Did you notice the time?" The clock inside the store, it was stuck at 10:07. I hadn't noticed, but as we climbed back into the car, I looked at the dashboard clock. 10:07 p.m. It wasn't a huge deal, but something about the synchronicity of it felt wrong. Adam was already pulling out of the lot and back onto the road, not thinking twice about it. We drove for another hour, but as the landscape started to change, something started to feel different. The air grew colder, even with the windows rolled up. And then we saw it, a sign, a battered wooden board by the side of the road, half hidden by the overgrowth of trees. It read, "Rest area 2 miles ahead." Cassie leaned forward from the passenger seat. Should we stop? We could use a break, and it looks like a good spot to sleep if we don't make it to a town tonight. Adam nodded. Sure, let's check it out. The rest area wasn't much, a small, decrepit building, a few picnic tables, and a narrow path leading into the woods. But there was something about it, something in the way the trees seemed to lean toward the structure, as though they were watching us. We pulled up to one of the picnic tables, the only other car in sight, a beat-up old sedan with no license plates. As we got out of the car, the wind picked up, and the sound of the trees swayed with an unsettling creak. Jordan and I both looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. We felt it then, the distinct cold feeling of being watched. Cassie, oblivious to our unease, pulled out a blanket and began to set up a spot on the ground near the tables. Adam was already exploring the rest area, poking around the building. He came back a few minutes later, his face pale. Hey guys, he said, voice low, you need to see this. We followed him back to the building, where he had found a small door on the side that led into a dark room. Inside was a tiny desk with a lamp that flickered faintly, and on the wall behind it, written in thick red letters, was a phrase that sent a chill down my spine. They are waiting. I stared at the words, not quite sure what to make of it. What does that mean? I don't know, Adam said, but his voice trembled slightly. But this place is weird. I don't like it. The air felt thick and damp, and I felt my skin crawl as I turned away from the wall. I was ready to leave, but Cassie didn't seem to share our concern. Let's just stay for a while, she said. We can figure it out in the morning. We reluctantly agreed to spend the night, but I don't think any of us slept well. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside. I couldn't see anything through the small window of the car, but it sounded like someone or something was pacing around the picnic tables. My heart began to race, and I tried to shake Adam awake, but he wouldn't stir. I turned to Jordan, who was sitting upright, staring out into the dark. I hear it too, he whispered. We listened for a while, but the footsteps stopped. Then came the scratching, a slow, rhythmic sound like something dragging along the ground. What the hell is that? I whispered, my throat tight with fear. Jordan didn't answer. Instead, he turned to me with wide eyes. The car? Look at the windows. I didn't want to, but I turned my gaze to the windows. They were covered in fog. But what was worse was the outline. There was something or someone standing just outside the car, its face pressed to the glass, eyes dark and unblinking. I couldn't breathe. The figure didn't move. It didn't blink or even seem to notice we were there. It just stood there, staring. Suddenly, the door to the rest area swung open, and a low voice called out. It's time to go. You're not welcome here. The figure by the window vanished in an instant, and we heard nothing but the wind. But we didn't wait. We started the car, sped off into the dark, and didn't stop until we found a well-lit gas station miles down the road. We never spoke much about that night after we left. We joked about it here and there, but the truth was none of us ever felt quite the same. Adam refused to take the same route back, and when we finally made it back home, none of us went near that stretch of highway again. It's been years now, but I still wonder about the rest area. What did it mean? The words on the wall. What did we wake up by stopping there? I've heard rumors of strange things happening along that road, strange disappearances, travelers who never return, and others who swear they've seen a shadow standing by their car in the middle of the night, just outside their windows. And sometimes in the dead of night, I hear a faint scratching sound at my window. Story. The end.
Story number 11.
It was supposed to be a fun road trip, just a weekend getaway with my best friends. It was the summer of 2018, and we were all looking for a break from the chaos of city life. There were 5 of us, me, Greg, Sarah, Kate, and Eli. We'd been planning this trip for months, choosing a route that would take us through the heart of the Midwest, visiting small towns and hitting up quirky roadside attractions along the way. Nothing too ambitious, just a few days to disconnect, take in some beautiful views, and make memories. We rented a van, packed up the essentials, snacks, a cooler, and a playlist full of road trip songs, and hit the road early one Friday morning. The sun was still low in the sky, casting that golden glow over the fields as we cruised along the highway. Everything seemed perfect. We were laughing, chatting, and enjoying the open road. Not a care in the world. The first few days went by smoothly. We passed through a handful of towns, each more charming than the last. We visited some old abandoned barns, took photos of dilapidated signs, and stopped at a few local diners where the food was surprisingly good. We even found a few quirky roadside attractions, including a giant, rusty dinosaur statue that Eli insisted we take a photo with. But it wasn't until the third night of our trip that things started to feel off. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just outside a tiny town in Nebraska, when we decided to stop for the night. It was well past dark by then, and the next town was too far to reach before we got tired. As we passed an exit for a rest stop, Greg noticed a small, dimly lit motel up the road and suggested we stay there. "We'll just crash for a few hours," Greg said, glancing at the gas gauge. "We're running low anyway, and this place looks like it's got character." We pulled off the highway and drove up the narrow road to the motel. It was old, maybe a bit rundown, but it had that classic roadside motel charm. The neon sign flickered as we pulled into the gravel parking lot. There was no one else there, just our van and a few vacant spaces. A single street lamp cast a faint glow over the lot. The woman behind the counter, an older woman with graying hair and a quiet, distant smile, handed us the keys to room 6. The place was cheap, but that was all we needed. We didn't care about the amenities, just a bed and a place to crash for the night. The room was small but clean. 2 queen-size beds covered in mismatched blankets. A dresser with a TV that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There was a faint smell of old wood and cleaning products, but nothing too offensive. We all unloaded our bags and settled in, making ourselves comfortable. Greg immediately flopped onto one of the beds and started flipping through channels on the TV. Sarah and Kate unpacked their things and sat at the small table near the window. Eli and I were trying to figure out where we could go for a late-night snack when Greg suddenly stopped flipping through the channels and stared at the TV. "Hey guys," he said, his voice low. "You ever hear of the Black Hollow Motel?" "Yeah, I've heard of it," Sarah replied. "It's kind of famous, right? I think it's haunted." Greg laughed nervously. "I don't know. I've just seen this weird documentary about it. People say strange things happen here, that some of the rooms are cursed or something." We all laughed it off. It was probably just a ghost story. But then Eli looked up from his phone and said, "Wait, is that the place with the disappearances? The one where people would check in and never leave?" At that point, the mood shifted slightly. Sarah, who had been the most skeptical of the group, seemed to hesitate before saying, "I've heard stories. There are rumors that people have gone missing around here for decades. People say the place is haunted by the spirits of those who disappeared." We all exchanged uneasy glances. It was just a story, right? Ghost stories were always exaggerated, especially when they came from places like this, small towns that needed to drum up some business. But even so, a strange chill seemed to hang in the air. As the night wore on, we tried to brush it off. We played cards, cracked open a few beers, and joked about the things we'd seen on the trip so far. But something about that motel, the emptiness of the parking lot, the quietness of the place, it just felt wrong. Later that night, after everyone had turned in, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing these faint sounds coming from outside the room, like soft tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the tapping seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. The noise continued, and now it seemed to be getting closer. I finally got out of bed and walked over to the window, peering out into the parking lot. The street lamp cast long shadows, and everything seemed perfectly still. No one else was around. I stood there for a while, watching the empty lot, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A figure, standing by the edge of the parking lot, near the trees. I squinted, trying to make out who it was, but the figure was too far away. I blinked, and when I looked back, it was gone. My heart started pounding in my chest. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The tapping outside had stopped, but the unease remained. I turned around to see if anyone else was awake, but the room was silent. Greg, Sarah, Kate, and Eli were all fast asleep. I lay back down, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. The next morning, no one mentioned anything about strange noises or anything unusual happening during the night. We packed up, ready to leave, and as we were checking out, I asked the woman behind the counter if she knew anything about the place's history. She smiled politely, but there was something about her eyes that made me feel uneasy. "Oh, this place has been around for decades," she said, her voice soft. "It's been through a lot of changes, but it's a good place to stay, as long as you don't mind the history. Some people say the rooms have their secrets." "Secrets?" I asked, half joking. She didn't laugh. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes drifting toward the door, as though she were waiting for someone. "You'll find that in a lot of old motels," she said quietly. "Some places are better left undisturbed." I didn't know what to make of her words, but something in the air had shifted. The place felt even more oppressive now, like it was holding on to something it didn't want to let go of. The five of us left the motel and got back into the van, eager to put the night behind us. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the motel in the rearview mirror. The parking lot was still empty, but it felt like something had followed us. We spent the rest of the day on the road, laughing and joking like nothing had happened. But when we reached our next stop, a small bed and breakfast just outside of Kansas City, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something had followed us. That night, after we'd unpacked and settled in, we sat down in the common room, talking about our plans for the next day. I was scrolling through my phone when I came across a news story that made my blood run cold. It was about the Black Hollow Motel. Apparently, 2 guests had gone missing just the week before we stayed there. They had checked in, but they never checked out. No one had seen them leave. The police had been called, but there were no signs of a struggle, no evidence that the couple had left the motel. Their belongings were still in their room, untouched, just like so many others before them. I didn't say anything to the others. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was in that place, whatever was haunting it, wasn't done with us yet. Story the end.
Story number 12.
It was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. Just me, my boyfriend, Luke, and a rented car, driving across the country. We had no set plans, no specific destinations. The goal was simply to escape the monotony of our everyday lives and experience the freedom of the open road. There were no deadlines, no obligations, just us, a map, and the endless stretches of highway. We left on a Friday morning, the sun just beginning to rise as we packed up the car, stuffed with snacks, a cooler, and our bags in the back. The car was an old model, nothing fancy, but reliable enough for a road trip. Luke was excited, practically buzzing with energy. He'd always been the more adventurous of the two of us, and I was more than happy to let him take the lead. Our first day on the road went smoothly. We stopped at small, charming diners along the way, chatted with locals, and took photos of scenic views. The landscape shifted as we crossed state lines, from rolling hills to barren deserts to dense forests that seemed to envelop us as we drove deeper into the heart of the country. We were both feeling exhilarated, but as the hours passed and the sun dipped lower in the sky, I began to feel the weight of the isolation around us. We had crossed into a rural stretch of highway when we decided to make camp for the night. There wasn't much around, just an old roadside rest stop with a few picnic tables and a small trail that led off into the woods. We weren't in any hurry, so we pulled over and set up for the night. The sound of distant crickets and the cool evening air made everything feel peaceful. We made sandwiches, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company. But as the sun sank behind the horizon, an eerie stillness began to creep into the air. "I'm going to take a quick walk around," Luke said, standing up from the picnic table. "Stretch my legs before we settle in for the night." I nodded, feeling a sudden unease. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't like the idea of being alone in this desolate place. There was something about the way the trees looked in the dimming light, their branches hanging low, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally far. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I smiled and waved him off. "Be careful," I called after him. He didn't hear me, or at least he didn't respond, as he disappeared into the woods. I sat back down at the picnic table, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The light was fading fast, and the air had grown colder. My eyes darted to the road occasionally, as if expecting a car to pass by, but the highway was empty. I didn't like being so isolated, but I tried to shake it off. This was supposed to be an adventure, a time to let go of the worries that had been piling up in our lives. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and still, Luke hadn't returned. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. The trees were so dense that it felt like I was surrounded by a wall of darkness. My unease grew. The rustling of leaves in the wind seemed louder than before, almost as though something was moving just beyond my vision. My instincts told me to call out for Luke, but I held back, trying to convince myself that he was just taking his time. Just as I stood up to go look for him, I heard footsteps. Not the light, casual ones you expect from someone walking on gravel, but heavy, deliberate steps, slow and rhythmic. They were coming from the woods where Luke had walked off to earlier. My heart started to race. "Luke?" I called hesitantly, my voice shaking. There was no response. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but still no sign of Luke. I strained my eyes in the direction of the sound, but all I could see was the impenetrable darkness of the trees. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, a sense of dread that settled over me like a weight. The footsteps stopped. Dead silence. The kind of silence that felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but something about the stillness was suffocating. Then I heard a voice. It was faint at first, as if someone was speaking from a distance, but it quickly grew clearer. "Help! Help!" The voice was low and raspy, barely above a whisper, but it was unmistakably human. It sounded like Luke. I rushed toward the woods, my heart pounding, calling his name out over and over again. "Luke, where are you?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. But there was no answer, only the soft, echoing whispers of the wind. The darkness between the trees was thick, like the air itself was unwilling to let anything pass through. The cold air stung my skin as I forced my way deeper into the forest, my breath quick and shallow. The footsteps had resumed, only they didn't sound like they were coming from Luke. They were heavier now, more deliberate. I stopped in my tracks, straining my ears. There, just beyond my sight, a figure stood. It wasn't Luke. The figure was too tall, too thin, its body hunched in an unnatural way. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. My entire body froze. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for my phone, but there was still no signal. My heart was racing, my mind screaming for me to run, to get away, but I couldn't move. The figure stood motionless, and yet I could feel its presence pressing in around me. It was as if the air had thickened, suffocating me with the weight of its attention. Suddenly I heard Luke's voice again, faint and desperate. "Help, please." I snapped my head to the side, the sound coming from deeper in the woods. I had to find him. I had to get to him. I forced myself to turn away from the figure and ran toward the sound of Luke's voice, pushing through the thick underbrush. "Luke," I called, my voice trembling. The footsteps followed me, and the whispering voice, low and guttural, taunted me from behind. "Help! You can't save him." I ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then suddenly, the forest cleared. I stumbled out into a small clearing where the moonlight broke through the trees. And there, lying motionless in the center of the clearing, was Luke. I rushed over to him, dropping to my knees beside him. He was breathing, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes were closed and his face was pale. I shook him, calling his name over and over again, but he didn't respond. It was as if he were in some kind of trance, his body frozen in place. And then I heard it again, the whisper. But this time it was right behind me. A cold, clammy hand pressed against my shoulder, sending a shock of ice through my spine. "Leave. Now." I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the trees. The voice was gone, but the sensation of the hand remained. I bolted upright, clutching Luke's arm and trying to drag him toward the edge of the clearing. But as I pulled, the ground beneath us seemed to shift, the earth seeming to swallow up the path. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching down like skeletal arms as if trying to pull us back into the darkness. I don't know how, but I managed to get Luke to his feet. My hands were trembling, my legs shaking, and my mind was a blur of panic. The world around me felt like it was closing in, the air heavy with a presence I couldn't explain. I half-dragged, half-carried Luke back to the car, my heart pounding in my ears. We didn't look back. I didn't want to know what was behind us, what was watching us, or what had followed us through the woods. When we reached the car, I shoved Luke into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. I didn't even take the time to put the car in gear. I just floored the accelerator and sped away, the tires kicking up dust as we left that place behind. We drove for hours, never speaking, both of us too shaken to utter a word. Eventually, the panic that had gripped me started to subside, but the unease lingered. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing. The road behind us was empty. When we finally stopped at a gas station miles away, Luke was still unresponsive. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't seem to recognize me. He was in a daze, his hands trembling. That night, we stayed at a small motel, and I tried everything I could to get Luke to speak, to tell me what had happened. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. The only thing he would say was, "I shouldn't have gone into the woods." We left the next morning, continuing our trip as planned, but the strange events from the night haunted us both. We didn't speak much about what had happened, but we both knew that something had followed us, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. And it was still out there, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 13.
It was supposed to be the perfect road trip, a last-minute getaway before summer ended, just a couple of friends hoping to escape the grind of work and school. Me, Sarah, and Kyle had been talking about taking a road trip for months, but between our conflicting schedules, it always seemed like we'd never make it happen. Then one weekend in late September, we decided to just go. We packed up Kyle's old Jeep, threw together some snacks and a playlist, and set out for the coast. It didn't matter where we were going, as long as we were on the road. We had no concrete plans, no itinerary, just a vague idea to head north along the coast and see where the road took us. The first couple of hours were fantastic. The wind rushing through the open windows, the radio blasting, and the endless stretches of road ahead of us. It was everything we had hoped for. We stopped a few times along the way to take pictures, grab some coffee, and just enjoy the open air. Everything was perfect, and we felt like we had the world to ourselves. But as the day began to fade into evening, things started to feel different. We were driving on some remote highway, a road that wound through forests, cutting between steep hills that blocked out the fading sunlight. There wasn't much around, just trees and a few dilapidated old houses every few miles. It wasn't exactly the most scenic route, but it felt peaceful in a way, like we were disconnected from the world, just a few souls on a long, open road. Then, just as the last of the sunlight dipped below the horizon, we saw it, a sign for a small town just a few miles ahead. We didn't even know the name of it, and I don't think we'd have paid it much attention, except for the fact that we were suddenly starving and it was getting dark. We hadn't seen a restaurant in ages, and we didn't want to keep driving in the dark without stopping. So we agreed to pull off the highway and check it out. The town was small. I mean, really small. Just a few blocks of old houses, a couple of shops, and what looked like a general store with a faded sign. The roads were empty, the streetlights barely flickering on in the growing darkness. We pulled into the only diner in town, Margaret's Diner, a cozy-looking place with a neon sign buzzing faintly in the window. Inside, it smelled like old coffee and fried food. The place had a warmth to it, even though it felt like it hadn't been updated in decades. The walls were covered in vintage photos of the town, yellowed and curling at the edges. There was a counter with a few stools, and at one of them sat an elderly man who barely looked up when we entered. The waitress behind the counter was young, with long dark hair and a pale face. She greeted us with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What can I get you all?" she asked, her voice flat. We sat down at a booth near the window, and as soon as we did, the man at the counter turned to look at us. He had a thin, scraggly beard and deep wrinkles around his eyes. His gaze lingered just a little too long. "You folks passing through?" he asked, his voice raspy, like he hadn't spoken in days. "We're just stopping for a quick bite," Kyle said, trying to smile. "Long drive ahead." The old man nodded, his eyes flicking from one of us to the next. He didn't say anything else, just went back to staring at his coffee. The waitress took our order, just some burgers and fries, and left us to our own devices. It wasn't until after she disappeared into the back that I noticed something strange. The diner was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator in the back and the occasional clink of silverware. We didn't talk much at first, but the unease started to settle in. I felt it first, a kind of pressing silence, like we were intruding on a place we weren't supposed to be. The man at the counter was still staring at us, his eyes sharp and calculating. He hadn't moved a muscle since we sat down, and the longer he watched, the more uncomfortable I became. Kyle noticed it too. He shifted in his seat, glancing around as if trying to figure out where everyone else was. There were no other customers. No one else was around. After a few minutes, the waitress came back with our food. The burgers were huge, greasy in that nostalgic diner way, with fries that looked like they'd been fried in the same oil for years. She set the plates down without a word, not even looking at us as she turned to leave. As soon as she was out of earshot, Kyle spoke up. "Something's off about this place," he said in a low voice. I nodded. "Yeah, I feel it too." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, glanced over at the old man. "I don't like how he's staring at us. I think we should eat and leave." But it wasn't just the man at the counter. The whole town felt wrong. It was like we had walked into a time capsule, into a town that was stuck in the past, where nothing changed, where no one left. It was the kind of place where people disappeared and no one ever asked questions. We ate in silence, trying to ignore the feeling that was creeping up our spines. But the more we ate, the more the feeling intensified. There was a heavy pressure in the air, a kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. When we finished, we didn't linger. We paid, and I swear, the waitress didn't blink once as she handed back the change, her expression still blank. The old man didn't look at us again as we left, but I could feel his gaze on my back, following us out the door. We got back in the Jeep, ready to leave the strange town behind us. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw it. A figure standing on the porch of the diner, watching us go. The man was still there, just standing in the rain, unmoving. But now there was something else. Just beside him, in the dim light, I saw another figure. It was a shadow, tall and thin, too tall to be human. It stood perfectly still, like it was waiting for something. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. As we drove away, the rain started to fall harder, and I felt the mood shift again. It was as if the night was closing in on us, wrapping us in its darkness. We didn't talk for the next several miles, all of us too unsettled to say anything. We passed a few more houses, then a sign for a gas station ahead. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. There was a flickering light from a solitary lamp in the distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, that the town we had just left was somehow still with us. It felt like the world had gotten smaller, like it had closed in around us. When we finally reached a gas station a few miles outside the town, we pulled over to fill up. I wasn't the only one who noticed the stillness of the place. The gas station was empty, no sign of anyone around. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us from all sides. I got out to pump the gas, but the second my feet hit the ground, I felt a chill run through me. It was like the world had gone quiet. I looked up and saw it, something moving in the distance, something dark moving quickly between the trees at the edge of the road. It was tall, like a shadow. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to look closer. I saw the figure again, this time much closer, standing just at the edge of the gas station lights. It was tall and thin, with no discernible features. It didn't move, it just stood there, staring at me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stumbled back to the Jeep, slamming the door behind me. "I saw it again," I said, my voice trembling. "Something is out there." Sarah and Kyle looked at me, their faces pale. "I saw it too," Kyle said. "It's the same thing that was by the diner." None of us said anything else. We just got back in the car and drove, the road stretching on forever, the weight of the silence pressing down on us. The rest of the night was uneventful. We didn't stop again until we reached a larger town about an hour away, but we all knew something had followed us. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't done with us. Story, the end.
Story number 14.
It was meant to be a simple road trip. My 3 best friends, James, Sophie, and Elena, and I had been talking about it for months, planning every detail down to the last stop. We'd all just finished our exams and wanted to celebrate by hitting the road and exploring parts of the country we'd never seen before. We decided to take an old scenic route through the mountains, one that ran through some remote areas and small towns, which we thought would be an adventure. We all piled into my old car, a beat-up sedan I'd inherited from my dad a few years ago. It was far from perfect, but it had character, and it had gotten us through countless road trips before. We packed our bags, grabbed snacks, and started driving before the sun even rose, eager to get started. The first few hours were filled with lighthearted conversations and the usual road trip banter. We played our favorite playlists, sang along to songs, and stopped at a few roadside diners for coffee. Everything was perfect. But by the time we reached the stretch of highway that ran through a stretch of remote mountain wilderness, things started to feel different. It was late afternoon when we hit the road leading through a dense, wooded area. The trees lined the sides of the road thickly, casting long shadows on the asphalt. The air grew cooler, and the car's headlights flickered in and out as if struggling against the thickening fog. We hadn't seen another car for miles, and the radio reception had started to get spotty. "We're probably going through some weird valley or something," James joked from the back seat, his voice slightly muffled by the fog. "You know, like the Twilight Zone? Anyone got a flashlight?" Sophie laughed. "Great. Now we're in some horror movie, and it's your fault." But despite the jokes, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The air in the car grew heavier, and an uncomfortable silence settled in. It wasn't the kind of quiet that was peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made you want to check your mirrors more often. We drove on, and the farther we went, the more I felt something was off. The road seemed endless, and as the sun began to set, it felt as though the darkness was swallowing us whole. The headlights of my car cut through the gloom, but they only illuminated a few feet ahead. The shadows seemed to stretch forever. "Let's pull over for a bit," Elena said, her voice unsteady. "I think we could use a break." I nodded, grateful for an excuse to stop. The tension in the air was palpable, and I needed to stretch my legs. I pulled over to the side of the road where the trees were so thick that the car's headlights barely pierced the blackness beyond. There was no sign of any civilization for miles in either direction, just an endless stretch of highway, trees, and the eerie quiet of the mountain wilderness. Sophie and James immediately started texting on their phones, but neither of them had service. Elena and I stepped out of the car to stretch our legs. The air was damp and cold, the faint smell of pine filling my lungs. As I stood there, staring out into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's get back in," I said, feeling a sudden chill. "This place is freaking me out." "Agreed," Elena replied, her voice tinged with unease. As we climbed back into the car, the stillness outside seemed to settle in around us, pressing against the windows like a suffocating weight. I started the engine, and we continued down the winding road, the car's headlights barely making a dent in the thick fog ahead. It was as though the world had disappeared into this endless stretch of nothingness, and I couldn't tell where the road ended and the trees began. "Do you think we're almost through this?" Sophie asked from the back seat, her voice low and uncertain. "I hope so," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's got to end soon, right? This road doesn't look like it goes on forever." But the more we drove, the longer the road seemed. Time started to stretch out. It was as though the minutes dragged on, the air with tension, and the fog grew heavier with each passing mile. I glanced at the gas gauge, half full, but it was enough to keep me anxious. We hadn't passed a gas station for miles, and I had no idea how much longer the road stretched ahead of us. The silence in the car was almost oppressive. No one was talking now, and the only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Even the radio was silent, unable to find a signal, and the few attempts we made to tune it to a station only resulted in static. Then, as we rounded a particularly sharp bend, I saw something in the road up ahead. It was a figure, small, hunched, and moving slowly across the highway. "Is that a person?" James asked from the back seat, his voice suddenly sharp. I slowed the car, squinting through the fog. The figure was still moving slowly across the road, dragging something behind it. I slammed the brakes, bringing the car to a stop just a few feet from the figure. We all stared at it, unsure of what to do. It was a woman. her long, dark hair hanging in front of her face, her clothes torn and dirty, and her steps unsteady. She was dragging something behind her, though it was difficult to make out what it was in the fog. The figure didn't seem to notice us. "Is she okay?" Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied. "I think we should." Before I could finish my sentence, the woman stopped moving and stood completely still in the middle of the road, facing us. We all froze, unable to look away from her. Then she lifted her head slowly, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes. Her lips parted, and in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, she whispered, "Turn back." The voice was weak, almost pleading. But there was something in the way she said it, an urgency, a desperation, that made my blood run cold. "What the hell?" James muttered, his voice shaking. "What does that mean?" I didn't have time to answer because, just as quickly as she had appeared, the woman turned and started walking off the road, vanishing into the thick fog. I didn't want to get out of the car. I didn't want to see where she went or what she was dragging. Something in my gut told me to drive away fast. But I couldn't. The stillness of the night pressed in on us, and I felt paralyzed. We sat there in stunned silence for a long moment. Finally, Elena broke the silence. "We should go. We need to get out of here." "Yeah," I said, my voice trembling. I put the car in gear, and we started driving again, the sound of the tires on the wet road the only thing breaking the silence. The air felt heavier now, suffocating, as if the world had pressed in on us. We drove for what felt like hours. The fog didn't clear, the road didn't end, but the odd thing was, we never passed the woman again. No more figures, no more strange occurrences, just the endless, dark road stretching before us. At some point, we passed a small town. It was barely visible, the lights dim in the distance. We drove through it quickly, too shaken to stop. As we left the town behind, I looked in the rearview mirror. In the distance, just beyond the trees, I thought I saw a faint light, a figure standing by the side of the road, watching us. But when I blinked, it was gone. We didn't talk much for the rest of the night. There wasn't anything to say. The journey had lost its charm. The road felt like a trap, and we wanted out of it. As soon as we found a motel with actual lights, we pulled in and collapsed into a room, locking the door behind us. None of us spoke of it again. Not directly. But we all knew what we had seen. And we all knew the same thing. Something in those woods on that road was waiting. Story the end.
Story number 15.
We had been planning the road trip for months, and it was supposed to be a simple, carefree escape from the chaos of our everyday lives. It was me, my best friend Emily, and my cousin Jack. 3 of us in my old Subaru, packed with snacks, music, and the promise of adventure. We had no real destination in mind, just the open road and the freedom that came with it. We decided to head west, exploring small towns and taking detours when we felt like it. We didn't have a care in the world. The trip started off just as we imagined, easy, full of laughter and spontaneous decisions. We stopped at quirky diners, small mom-and-pop shops, and scenic viewpoints. Everything was perfect. The weather was warm, the skies clear, and the world felt as if it was ours to explore. The kind of trip where you think about nothing except where to stop next and what you might find. It wasn't until the 3rd day, just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, that things started to feel off. We were driving down a narrow stretch of highway, a winding road that cut through thick forests and past only the occasional farmhouse. It was the kind of place where you could go hours without seeing another car. We had planned to camp by a lake we'd read about, but the GPS had failed us, and we ended up lost in the middle of nowhere. We were running low on gas, so we decided to pull over at a small, rundown gas station that appeared suddenly as if it had materialized out of thin air. The place looked deserted. No cars, no people. Just an old station with a flickering neon light and a couple of weathered pumps. The building was dilapidated with peeling paint and broken windows. It had that eerie, forgotten feel to it, like it hadn't seen customers in years. "Well, this is charming," Jack said, half joking, as he leaned over from the back seat. "Maybe the gas station attendant is a ghost." Emily rolled her eyes. "Very funny." We all piled out of the car, stretching our legs and taking in the strange, still silence of the place. There wasn't even a hum of a nearby road, just the rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant chirp of crickets. I walked toward the pumps, noticing the absence of the usual open sign. But when I tried to lift the nozzle to check the gas, I realized it was locked in place. It was as if the station hadn't been in use for years. Jack joined me and tried to fiddle with the pump, but there was no way it would work. "Doesn't look like we're getting gas here," he muttered. "Let's just head back on the road." But before we could even get back in the car, the door of the station creaked open. It was a slow, groaning sound, as if the hinges hadn't been moved in decades. We all froze, staring at the door, which had opened just a crack. Then a figure stepped out, a man, probably in his late 60s, wearing a faded red cap and an old denim jacket. His face was weathered, almost leathery, and his eyes were sunken. He looked at us for a long moment before speaking. "You folks lost?" he asked, his voice raspy and uneven. We all exchanged uncertain glances. Jack spoke first, trying to mask his unease with politeness. "Yeah, we're trying to get to the lake up ahead, but the GPS is acting weird. Could you point us in the right direction?" The man stood there, silent for a moment, staring at us with eyes that felt too piercing. Then he nodded slowly and stepped closer. "You're not far. Just follow the road past the old mill. Keep your eyes on the left and you'll find it." "Thanks," I said, wanting to get back in the car. The air around this place felt oppressive, heavy in a way I couldn't quite explain. He didn't say anything else. He simply turned and walked back into the station, the door creaking closed behind him. "Well, that was weird," Emily muttered. "I didn't like that guy," Jack agreed, his voice low. "Something's off about this place." We didn't linger. We got back in the car and drove off, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As we passed the old mill, the trees grew thicker, and the road narrowed even more. The fading light made everything look a little too shadowy, too distorted. The air seemed colder, too, a chill creeping in despite the warm weather. We continued down the winding road for what felt like an eternity, but no lake ever appeared. We were starting to worry, but then, just when I thought we might need to turn back, a faint light appeared in the distance. A house, maybe a mile down the road, glowing in the twilight. "Maybe we can stop there," Emily said. "See if someone can help us." I agreed, and we pulled off the road and onto a gravel driveway. The house was old, a large farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The windows were dark and the paint was peeling, but there was a faint light coming from one of the windows. As we got out of the car, we could hear the rustling of leaves again, but this time there was an eerie silence that seemed to surround us. No birds, no crickets, nothing except the wind moving through the trees. It felt unnatural, like the world had suddenly gone still. We walked up to the front porch and knocked. No answer. We knocked again, louder this time, and still no answer. Jack gave the door a nudge and it creaked open on its own. We all stood frozen for a moment, the feeling of unease growing stronger. "Maybe we should go," Emily whispered, her eyes wide. But before we could turn around, the door opened all the way, and we were greeted by a voice. "You're here," the voice said, soft but clear. It was the man from the gas station. How he got here so fast, I didn't know. I stepped back instinctively, feeling my stomach drop. What do you mean? How did you?" He gave a crooked smile, his teeth yellow and worn. "I've been waiting for you," he said simply. We didn't know how to respond. We stood there, too startled to move, as the man beckoned us inside. "You might as well come in. It's not safe out there. Not tonight." Against our better judgment, we followed him inside. The house was dark and cold, with old furniture that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Dust covered the floors, and the air smelled stale, like something had been left to rot. But what struck me the most was the quiet. The kind of quiet that made your ears ring, like there was something wrong with the world. He led us into the kitchen, where there was an old wood stove that still had a fire burning in it. But it didn't give off much heat. The man motioned for us to sit at the table. "You'll want to stay here for the night," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Trust me, it's safer inside." "We don't want to intrude," Jack said, but his voice trembled. "We'll just get back in the car and drive." "No," the man replied, his voice suddenly sharp. "It's not safe. You'll see." We were too frightened to argue. Something about him, about the house, had us rooted to the spot. We didn't leave. We stayed there as the man muttered things under his breath. Something about the curse of the road, and how it had to be done. The night dragged on, the silence stretching on for hours. We didn't know what was going to happen, but it was clear that we had stumbled to something that wasn't just a bad detour. As the clock struck midnight, we finally realized the truth. We were never meant to leave this place. It wasn't just a road trip. It was something much worse. Something ancient. Something waiting for us to make the wrong turn. We never made it back. We never left. Story the end.